Hi, Owen, a 34-year-old company entrepreneur today. 4 years ago, the one person I never would have guessed would go that far flipped my life upside down. My own brother. I never dreamed I would be here, penning a book on how a betrayal still haunting me tore apart my family's shipping company. Here we are, nevertheless. The narrative begins when I was 30 and my dad chose to go away from our family company. Having left college 3 years ago, I had been working for the firm, intending to inherit it once my dad retired. I dropped out of school as I thought a degree would not be as valuable as practical experience. Dad agreed, urging me to work for the firm as long as I could. I did also. My younger brother Kyle was always a bit of a wild card. I worked hard, learning all I could, and thought I was being groomed to take over one day. At the time, he had just graduated from college and is 4 years my junior. We were never particularly close growing up. Our sibling rivalry went beyond typical depth. While Kyle was accustomed to his parents bailing him out of trouble, I have always been the more conscientious one. Still, I never imagined he would turn on me the way he did. Kyle dropped a bombshell at my dad's retirement party that would permanently alter my life. He accused me of corporate theft in front of our whole family as well as several business acquaintances. He said I had been embezzling money for months and had created documents, fully fake proof. He had obviously been planning this for some time, developing his case with corrected documents and testimony from a few bought workers. I was blindsided. He did not simply come up with this on a whim. Before believing such wild charges, I implored my parents to pay attention and at least look at things. They didn't, though. Shocked, they chose to trust Kyle instead of listening to me. Once told I was his successor, my dad looked me in the eye and dubbed me a desperate dropout, placing my decision to abandon college back in front of me. I attempted to explain, but it was useless. He expressed disappointment in me, that I had let the family down. My parents backed Kyle and sacked me right away. I lost my family that evening in addition to the business I missed. They informed me they wanted me out of sight from their life. That was the toughest thing to chew on. Based on his falsehoods, my own father, who had urged me to work with him, had turned his back on me. I felt ashamed and betrayed leaving that gathering. Looking back now, I ought to have pursued a case for wrongful termination. Though I could have legally rebelled, I was too proud, too furious, too damaged to do it. I let Kyle take everything instead. Though Kyle was just 26 and had actual business experience, my dad gave him the firm. Still, none of it counted. He had prevailed, and I was out. Life was a fight for the next few years. Having Kyle's falsehoods hovering over me, I couldn't land a suitable job. Everyone in our field of business was aware of the allegations. Even though my family never sought legal action, harm was done. I banned myself once word got out I had been pilfering from my own family, one of the worst periods in my life. Nobody trusted me or would hire me. To maintain a roof over my head, I was scraping by doing whatever odd work I could locate. I finally had to leave town totally and relocate to a new city without knowing anyone. There, I launched a little delivery company that, with many effort, has at last become steady. Though I make a good livelihood today, it is not at all like what I used to know. Enough to survive, but the thought of what could have been, the life snatched from me, still hurts. Fast forward to last week. 4 years of quiet passed before my parents contacted me. To find my mother's name showing up on my phone startled me. I initially considered it may have been some error, but then I read the message. My dad had death on mind. Years of failing his heart had come to pass, and now they were stating it was just a matter of time. Part of me wanted to say no. They implored me to come back home to see him before it was too late. Why should I hurry back to their side after everything they had put me through and after deciding for Kyle's lies over me? But in that reply, they also noted something else that drew my attention. They acknowledged they began to question Kyle's account. They claimed they were unsure now if they had made the correct choice, but they were too afraid to investigate in case it meant losing Kyle too. Apparently, my dad had been thinking about his decisions. His last desire was to have me back in the family heading the company alongside my brother. Kyle? Following all he accomplished? I told my mother I needed time to consider it. There was not any way in hell that was happening. I wasn't going to revert into the family fold since nothing had occurred. Not 4 years of cut off, trying to reconstruct my life from nothing. After some thought, I decided different from the person I had been before they tossed me aside. I would just return to the family under one condition. My brother had to go. No way I could have worked with him. No way I could have let him remain in command with what he had done. Kyle would have to be let go if they wanted me to lead the company. When I told her my choice over the following day, my mom was shocked. She said I was acting irrationally, that my dad had little time left, and that I was projecting this about the company. Still, it was about my life, not only the business. Wanting control of the business, Kyle had destroyed my reputation, my profession, and my connection with my family. And now, they expected me to simply return and collaborate with him like none of it had ever occurred? Not at all. It had to be on my terms if they wanted me back. My mother took this poorly, saying that I was no better than Kyle if I pushed them to pick between me and Kyle. She sought to shame me into altering my opinion. But that was untrue. Kyle framed me. To obtain what he desired, he lied and twisted everyone. I assured her I wasn't going to move. I was merely seeking what was rightly mine in the first place. Either Kyle left, or I stayed permanently out of their life. I had gone through enough to simply pardon and forget. Should they fail to correct things, I knew precisely where I stood with them, and that is where things are now. What my parents will do is unknown to me. Perhaps they will once more pick Kyle. Perhaps they will at last glimpse the truth. Still, I have peace with it in either case. 4 years ago, I was different from now. I am not going to let them take away from me once more. I have established a life for myself. After telling my mother about my illness, a few days went by. For a long, I heard nothing from my folks. Honestly, I wasn't surprised. Though I realized I had asked for a hard pill for them to swallow, I wasn't ready to give up. The individuals meant to have my back had set aside, deceived, and embarrassed me for years. There was nothing left to talk about if they failed to act in the required manner to rectify the wrongs. But then, a few days following that stressful phone chat with my mother, I received a text from my dad. Given he seemed to be on his deathbed, I was not expecting this communication. As my mother had indicated, my dad informed me he was quite sick and that he had little time left. The message was straightforward but contained a lot. He claimed I was making it difficult, but he wanted things right between us before he departed. He informed me that not only was my desire to have them fire Kyle useless, but also cruel. He begged me to return home, reminding me that Kyle was still my brother, and that should I truly care about the family, I would let the past go for the benefit of his dying request. He said he wanted me to come back, run the business alongside Kyle, believing that we could put our differences aside for the greater good, if not for each other, then at least for him. He ended the message by saying he loved me, despite everything that had happened. His tone was shockingly delicate. I sat there reading the letter over and over again, experiencing a whirl of emotions. He stated he still believed in me and he didn't want to die with us separated. Hearing something like that used to break me at one point. All I wanted at one point was to hear my dad say he loved me and that he thought of me. Still, things were different now. The words wounded, yes. But I was no more that 24-year-old child, seeking approval from my father. I had battled too hard to climb out of the hole they had plunged me into. Though I had learned to stand on my own 2 feet, and I wasn't ready to fall now just because they felt guilty about how they treated me, his comments did have an impact on me. It was not like I gave my family no thought. Sure, I did. I couldn't act, however, as though nothing had occurred, though. The scars ran too far back. After considering it for a few hours, I decided to reply. The thought of working with Kyle, the brother who had attempted to ruin me, was something I just couldn't handle. I was sad that his health had grown so terrible. I told my dad I loved his message. Still, I stood by my state of affairs. I told him Kyle's actions had wrecked my life. If they really felt bad about what had occurred, the least they could do would be hold him responsible. Not after everything he had done. I told him I cannot work with Kyle. I wasn't trying to be callous, but I had to guard myself. I informed him I was ready to return, only provided they made the required adjustments. Working with the exact person who had framed me and drove me away from the family, I couldn't be expected to go back into that poisonous atmosphere. My dad didn't reply for a few days, and during that time I started to doubt my choice. Perhaps I was being rather inflexible. Perhaps I was allowing pride to interfere. My dad was dying after all. Suppose this was my final opportunity to reconcile things with him. Would I be regretful of clinging to this resentment once he passed? But every time I began to doubt myself, I thought back to those terrible years following family estrangement. The search for employment, the loneliness of being cut off, the humiliation of having my own brother declare me a thief. Those recollections strengthened my determination. I had battled to reconstruct my life for myself, and I wasn't about to let it go to waste by falling in now. Then, out of the blue, my dad contacted me. After not hearing his voice in 4 years, it seemed odd, like speaking with a stranger rather than my father. He spent no time flitting about with politeness. He claimed he understood why I felt the way I did after considering my situation and came right to the issue. Still, he offered me something. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My dad told me he was ready to hand over the whole company to me, fire Kyle, give me complete control of the business, but only on one condition. I would never see or communicate with him, my mother, or anyone else in the family again. He repeated himself when I urged him to. He stated he would make sure the company was mine should I pledge to never interact with them once more. I wouldn't be permitted to phone my mother, visit any family gathering, or even attend his burial, though. He assured me he would grant me everything I wanted if I were ready to sacrifice my family for the company. I was astonished. However, I had to make a decision. Part of me thought this was a ploy, a means of gauging my own willingness to travel for the business. Still another side of me, though, sensed his seriousness. I told Dad I needed time to consider it. He had always been a stern guy, never one for emotion, and I knew he could follow through with anything like this. He replied it was okay, but he wouldn't wait long. His health was failing, and he wanted a response quickly. I pondered his offer for the next 4 hours. There was never such a decision. One hand, I had the opportunity to reclaim what was properly mine and at last run the business I had been aiming at for years. Conversely, I would be severing all links to my family going forward. Again, though, had they already severed their relationship with me? Was not I already living without them? As I gave it more attention, I came to see how obviously right my choice was. I accepted his offer when I phoned my dad, backtracking. I was good with not talking to them again. There was a lengthy pause on the other side of the telephone, and then my dad burst if he was ready to turn over the company and dismiss Kyle. Declaring he was sorry to have raised someone like me, he labeled me callous, selfish, and I could go to hell for all he cared, he told me. But I didn't deserve the business, the family, or anything else. I let his comments pass by. He had asked me to decide, and I had decided upon what to do. I hung up on him after that, and I haven't heard from him since. I don't know what's going to happen now. He was the one who had originally cut me off. Now he was merely asking me to carry on living the way I had been for the past 4 years, except this time. Perhaps my dad will follow through, perhaps not. One thing is very evident, though. I'm not backing down. I have gone too far to allow them drag me back into that poisonous environment without correcting things. After that last talk with my dad, I didn't hear from him for a few days. If that makes me the evil person, so be it. I honestly didn't blame him. I believed he was still enraged. Our relationship was damaged, and I knew accepting his offer would be the last nail in the casket. I assumed the stillness would last always. The unexpected phone call from my grandma caught me off guard, though. It was Sunday afternoon, and I was simply going about my regular schedule, trying to clear the entire disaster from my thoughts, when my phone rang. The name on the screen froze me. Grandma. I hadn't spoken to her in years, not since everything went down with my brother, and I had thought she had sided with my parents and cut me off, exactly like everyone else. Seeing her name now seemed weird, like some element of my old life attempting to creep back in. I answered, half dreading what I would hear, but Grandma's voice was warm and full of feeling. She wasn't furious. She really sounded more disturbed than anything. She was weeping, pleading me to alter her mind. She told me she had heard about the talk I had with my dad, about the condition I had set for my return, and about how my dad had offered me the business in exchange for never speaking to him or the family again, her voice quivering. "Your father is sick," she murmured. "He just has a little time left, and all he wants is to see you one more before he leaves. You have to pardon him before it is too late." I sat silent, letting her talk, but my head was racing, and I didn't let this be the way things finish. It was not as though I had not considered it. Naturally, I did have. After all, this was my dad. He was my father, regardless of how often we had disagreed or how much he had wounded me. The thought of Dad passing away without us reconciling ever broke me deeply. But I also couldn't forget the way he had treated me, how he had pushed me out so quickly, how he had believed Kyle's falsehoods without even giving me a chance to explain myself. "I understand what you're saying, Grandma," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. Still, I cannot just pardon and go on. Not that easy. He booted me out, destroyed my name, let Kyle run the company while I was left penniless. Now he expects me to return, collaborate with Kyle, and seem as if everything is under control. She exhaled heavily, and her voice revealed much exasperation. "But you are not the same person you were in those days. You have developed both personally and professionally. Surely it is time to let the past go. That quote S when I had a crucial insight. In at least one sense, I had let the past go. I had gone past the hurt, the treachery, and the resentment. Lost child, I was not really enraged. Instead, I was frantically seeking acceptance from a family that devalued me. But releasing did not equal forgetting, and it meant not embracing the same poisonous dynamic that had originally split us apart. Grandma, I added gently, I'm not holding a grudge. I also cannot just return to being the family scapegoat, though. Dad must own what happened if he is truly ready to put things right. And Kyle, he has to answer for it. Nothing will change if I go back and find that things are exactly as they were. She remained silent for a long time, and I wondered whether I had at last connected with her. I would be stepping straight back into the same situation. She still clearly did not see things the way I did, though, when she spoke once more. "Family is more important than pride," she responded resolutely. "Your father is passing away. Are you truly wanting this to be his memory of you? As the son who turned against forgiving him?" That really hit me hard. It was the type of incident that stays with you, chewing at the margins of your conscience and challenging all you know. Was I truly only feeling pride? Was my judgment distorted by my resentment? Should my dad pass away? The last memory I could recall of me was of me demanding that he dismiss Kyle before I would have given it any thought. Not sure what to respond, I told her I needed time to consider. She consented but advised me not to linger too long. Time was running out. That evening, I slept little at all. My head continued running over everything, acting out several possibilities, asking if I had made the right decision. Was I going to let my dad die without seeing him once more? While I stood on the sidelines, cut off from everyone, was I going to let Kyle win, allow him keep the business and the family? When I woke up the following morning, Kyle texted me. "Don't even think about coming back," said a straightforward message that caused my fury to boil. The mine owned by the corporation currently, that was it. You would never get your way. All the uncertainty and all the second guess disappeared in a moment. Kyle had not altered. Still the same sly, manipulative jerk he had always been. He was doing all he could to keep me away. He would win if I turned back now, hence I could not allow it happen. I disabled his number and determined that if my dad wanted things right, he needed to meet me midway, as I cannot let him walk all over me once more. Not because he was unwell was I going to come crawling back. He had to show he knew the seriousness of what had transpired before I could pardon him. And it meant handling Kyle once and for once. Later that day, I gave my dad a call. I told him I would be ready to see him only if Kyle left the business. He was just removed from any position of authority, not sacked. I was not demanding anything perfect. My dad remained silent for a time before sighing. I was seeking fairness. He responded, his voice sounding less than I had ever heard. "I cannot do that. Like you are, Kyle is my son." Not now, but I felt a knot in my throat and gulped it down. My sons are not clear-cut either. "You already did," I answered softly. "You choose Kyle over me 4 years ago." He didn't answer straight away, and I could tell he was struggling with what to say. "You are now telling me to act as though that never occurred." At last he just said, "I'm sorry." Those 2 words, straightforward as they were, really affected me more than I had anticipated. Still, they were insufficient. Not after everything. I apologized too, then I hung up. That was the last talk I had with my dad. I stopped watching for their calls after that. I stopped wondering whether they would have change of opinion. I had decided, and I was following that choice. I knew it wouldn't be simple, and part of me despised the idea this was how things were ending if they couldn't meet me halfway. At least, though, I had dignity. At least I wasn't letting them stroll all over me anymore. And that, for me, was enough. The days after that last chat with my dad were oddly tranquil. Though I was not at peace, I had made my decision, and it seemed like finality. Not after the way things had turned around, I knew my folks would not be in contact once more. Now we were at a standoff, my father having decided to hang on to his pride as I had chosen to hang on to mine. Though it was expected, the quiet that followed was loud and heavy. About 1 week later, I received a text from an unidentified number. Though I didn't know it, when I opened the message, it came from my mother's brother, my uncle. He hadn't participated in any of the turmoil between my parents, Kyle, or myself, and I had figured he didn't want to take sides. But his comments surprised me since his dad's situation had gotten worse. The physicians claim it just takes a few days. That message rested on my phone like a weight. If you want to see him now is the moment. Ignoring it was first my inclination. Having previously bid farewell in my own manner, I was not going to be pulled back into that mess simply because they were desperate. But I found myself thinking about it often as the hours passed. It was my father. He was still my dad despite all that had occurred. I couldn't get rid of the thought that, should I not attend, I would live to regret it. Was I supposed to let my dad die without ever seeing him ever more? Not even trying to fix things, even if it was only for my own peace of mind? I turned it over in my thoughts all evening. I went back and swung between my pride versus the prospect of closure. But at last I realized what I had to do. Should I not at least attempt, I would constantly wonder what may have occurred. I had to visit him one final time, even though I might not have forgiven him totally and perhaps we would never mend our friendship. The next morning, I got in my car and headed back to my hometown, owing that much, if not for him, then for myself. 4 years had passed since my previous visit, and the trip was loaded with memories I had worked so hard to ignore. Every mile seemed more weight than the last. By the time I arrived at my parents' house, I was unsure whether I would be able to enter. My uncle had informed me that my dad was in hospice care at home, surrounded by family. Everybody's eyes were staring at me as soon as I got out of the car and started up the driveway. Some of my cousins were outside, and they looked at me with a mix of sympathy and inquiry. The door opened before I could even knock, and my mom was standing there, her eyes red and swollen from sobbing. They knew I hadn't been around for years, yet here I was turning up at the last minute. We simply looked at one another for a time. Neither of us knew quite what to say. She then stretched out to hug me. Though I allowed her, it felt uncomfortable and rigid. She said nothing, neither did I. Not much to say, really. She took me inside and I trailed her down the hall to my dad's room. The place smelt medicinal and sterile. When we got to his room, she paused outside the door and turned to me. He's been waiting for you, she said, her voice almost holding together. I nodded and walked inside. This was the same house I had grown up, the home where so much had gone wrong. Lying in bed, my dad seemed little and fragile. His face was pale, with large bags under his eyes. Nevertheless, when he saw me, he gave a subdued grin. I stopped for a second, not sure why. I just stood there, staring at the man who had thrown me out of the family, the man who had reared me. His words barely audible, he rasped, "Come closer," looking nothing like the powerful, commanding man I knew. I swallowed the knot in my throat and stepped up to his bedside. Though I wanted to say so much, none of it felt appropriate. That moment seemed to evaporate all the rage and fury I had held for years, replaced with something I couldn't quite articulate. Perhaps it was grief, or perhaps it was just the finality of it all. "I'm glad you came," he muttered with bleary eyes. "I almost didn't," I said, my voice subdued. "I didn't think you would." He laughed weakly, then couched into a cough. "That sounds like you," he remarked, his smile faltering. "Stubborn, just like me." We sat in quiet for some time. Neither did I know how to start, nor did it appear like he did. At last he shattered the quiet. "I'm sorry," he muttered, his voice just a whisper. Back then, I should have paid attention to you. I should have had faith in you. I made an error. Though I was mistaken, I felt I was acting morally by trusting Kyle. Hearing him acknowledge it was like a weight lifting off my chest, but it didn't provide the closure I expected. Now I have little time to correct it. I had waited years for him to say those words, but now that he had, I wasn't sure what to do with them. "I'm sorry too," I murmured, my voice heavy with feeling. "For all things. But I cannot return to the past." He nodded gently as if he anticipated it. "I know," he whispered gently. "I would not expect you to. Just wanted you to know. Son, love you. I've loved you always." Tears welled up in my eyes, but I wiped them away, not sure how to present it. "I know, Dad. I love you too. It was not the ideal atonement. We did not reverse the years of betrayal and suffering or fix all of our issues. But it made no difference at that instant. That was enough. We had said what needed to be said." I stayed with him for a while more, just sitting at his side as he drifted in and out of sleep. Though I could sense the finality of it all, instead of the resentment I had held for so long, there was calm. When I left, my mother hugged me once more, this time closer than before. Though I knew things between us would never be the same, for now, it was sufficient. 1 week later, my dad died. I stayed away from the funeral. I found it difficult to face everyone, particularly Kyle. I did not, however, feel sorry about it. After his death, I got a letter from my father's attorney. I had spoken my farewells in my own manner, and that was all I needed. My dad had given me a piece of the business, and it was simple but direct. Not exactly the whole thing as I had hoped, but a good portion. Kyle still was in command, although right now I sat at the table. Though it was something, it was hardly the triumph I had imagined. I turned down the offer at last. I had created my own business and life and no longer needed the family enterprise to define me. I turned over it to Kyle. As for me, I felt at last free. Let him live with the results of our father's choices, release from the weight of the past and the demand for approval. I didn't need the company. I didn't need the inheritance. I didn't need their approval anymore. All I wanted was my quiet, and after all these years, I at last got it.